Okay, so that's been fun doing some styling and getting involved in the whole styling and laying things out. But let's get back to my more preferred thing to do, which is just anything related to JavaScript functionality specifically. So let's go back to, oh, wait, actually, before we do that, I saw that I made a mistake, another typo. Yes, yes, I know, more typos. So in the main.js, in the class name, here, if you go down, you want to go back to the form. So go to the class name MB3. Sorry, go to your form in main, and then go down all the way to where you see the divs that we made under the input, where we have the type text, the placeholder. Okay, and underneath that, we created some divs with input, different types of input class with different types of divs with class styling. And I wanted to write input group open, but I wrote grouped. So let's just correct that mistake. So let's make an input group instead of input grouped. And let's go to Firefox. Okay. And that's better. All right. And then next up, let's go into our app. And I also want to add in the render section of our app where we created a div that says class name row, next to it, I want to add content as well. So let's bring in content. Let's save that in the style. Actually, you know what? What am I even talking about? Just get rid of that content. That's not right. Okay, so we have our main component that's loading, and we have our navbar component that's loading. They're both loading on our main app, right? Which now we know goes into our index.js and then gets rendered onto the DOM. All right, that's how React works, not magic. So now what we want to do is, because we've created this main component and we separated it, and we separated its logic, what we can do actually is create a loader so that when we're loading, we don't actually, that when the page is actually loading, instead of seeing a blank screen, we could actually get a read for a loading. We can get a read for a loading, and only when we're done loading, then we can actually send over the main component. And that's good to know as well, because, and why else would that be good to have? Well, it's functionally important for what we're doing here, because if we load our contracts, because if we don't load all these contracts before our main gets loaded, then people use it, it's going to break. You know, we only want to load the main after we know that we've loaded everything else, that the contracts have been loaded. Then they get the function. So after the contracts have been loaded, then they get to use it, right? If it hasn't been loaded and they use it, that's not good. So we can actually prevent this from happening by creating this loading wall, all right? And it's just a good look, and it's just a good thing to have. So how do we do this? How do we write the logic for this? Well, we're already halfway there, because we've created the loading state, and we set the loading state to false once these important contracts have been loaded, right? So what do we want to do after that? Well, all of our rendering happens in here, right? So we want to put the loading in here. So above render, what we're going to do is create a variable, and we're going to call it content, like this. Okay? And before we return anything, we're going to set up a conditional statement. We're going to actually use a conditional operator. If we want to use JavaScript, what we do is we turn on the curly brackets, or sorry, we type in some curly brackets to load so that we can put our JavaScript in JSX. Okay? And then what we can do in here is we can say this dot loading. Remember, we have to call it from this. So this dot loading, or sorry, this dot state dot loading. And what we're going to say is, if this dot state dot loading is true, then we're going to create a paragraph, which is going to take an ID of loader. Okay. Text is going to be center, and oops, we got to put that inside. Text center, and we're going to have a style here, and we're going to create a margin of 30 pixels. Okay, and then what are we going to write here for our paragraph? Well, we want to write loading, please, ... And so this is like an if statement. What's great about this operator is that it's basically a this or that type of functionality, which works perfectly for something like loading, because essentially, for something like loading this, because essentially all we really want to say here is if the state of loading is true, if the state is set to true, load this text that says loading, please. Sorry, then display this text that says loading, please. Now, if it's not true, what we do is we use a semicolon. Sorry, we use a colon. So we use a question mark to say, well, then do this. And then we use the colon to say, well, if that's not true, then do that. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to set our variable content to equal main. Okay. And okay, first of all, it's maybe hard to kind of read all that all the way out. So let's do some indentation so you can read it better. So we'll put the class name here. Maybe you can see this better. Actually, here, let's load it like that. So, and we'll put the style like that. Okay, you may be thinking, well, you just put it exactly back to how you had it. All right, let's try it like this. Let's go through this one more time. So what are we saying exactly? What we're saying is that we create a variable called content. Then we create a conditional statement here that says, that basically checks to see if we're loading, if the loading is set to true. If the loading is set to true, then we basically just have this loader. Then we have a text that says loading, please. And if it's not true, then we just load the main. Okay? So we wait. So because of this, now we get to wait for all these contracts to load before we give permission to our customers to use it. That way it's not going to break because we have to get the network patched in first. All right. Okay. So that's a lot to kind of grasp one after another, but hopefully that's making a bit of sense. Let's just save this and see what happens. So I'm going to go into Firefox and we're getting an error that says 87 assignment function call saw an expression. So let's go take a look. Okay. So, I forgot to actually include what we're doing, what this is going to be. Because right now this doesn't work because we're just saying if state.loading is true, then randomly there's this p paragraph, this thing that exists, but it's not set to anything. So what we want to do is actually set this to the content. So I didn't actually complete the code correctly here. So I want to say content equals. So let's save this. Try again. Let's go back. Okay, great. And now we see that it's not breaking. But is it actually loading? Well, I don't see any loading thing. Do you? When I refresh it? No, nothing. So why is that? Well, let's go back to our code. So the reason why it's not actually loading right now is because we never actually switched our main to our content, right? If you look here, we create this variable content and we say, okay, if it's loading, then send this message loading, please. Otherwise, just, load the main. But what are we actually rendering? We're not rendering the content. We're always rendering the main no matter what. So how do we fix this? Well, if you said, let's take the content and put it in here, but you forgot to use JSX, well, you're close. But if you said, let's put the content here and add the JSX curly brackets because it's JavaScript, and we save this now, then you are a rock star. So let's give this a shot. Hold on a second. Let's refresh. Did you see it? Should we do it again? Did you see it that time? I'm zooming in. Let's do it again. There it is. Okay, incredible. Okay, amazing. So we've got our loading functionality to work. Hopefully you understand why this functionality is so important for the application and how this functionality is beneficial in general. This is something that can be used for many different things. So loading is something that you can see a lot of in applications. Therefore, you see a lot of it in applications, in both. So hopefully there's some good takeaways here for you. And I hope you enjoyed that. That's it on the loading. In the next video, let's actually finally start passing in our contract information, the staking information, everything into our main component so that we can actually start depositing and withdrawing. Okay, very exciting stuff. Great work getting through this. Great work making it this far, and I'll see you in the next video.